Hey guys, it's Danny. Vacation is over, sadly, and as you can see, I'm not done with arranging my grow room, but one of these days it will be done. 2 weeks is not enough, but I hope you guys missed me because I missed you. I am ready to kick off the orchid season with a myth or truth type of a video. Are you guys excited? Judging by the comments, you are, because you really like this series and I really like making it. So today we're gonna hopefully bust a few more myths that you guys left me in the comment section or in the community section or even on Instagram. And what do you know? Today's video is also sponsored by Skillshare. Stay tuned to learn how you can get a completely free 1-month trial. So without further ado, let's just start. But I will remind you that at any point throughout this video, you can actually leave a like, you can leave a comment, maybe with a myth that you'd like me to bust. And also you can subscribe because I post 3 times a week and all of these things are absolutely free. So that said, let us start, shall we? Okay, I'm gonna start with an older one from Instagram. Are Phalaenopsis really the easiest to grow? Are they really the best beginner orchid? And I will have to say, absolutely 100% they are. Out of everything you can grow, even though yes, Cattleyas, Dendrobiums, Oncidiums can be quite easy, Phalaenopsis are much easier. First of all, let's start with the beginning. It's really easy to find a Phalaenopsis, a miniature one, a classic quote-unquote one. You can go to the flower shop, garden center, supermarket even, and you can find a beautiful Phalaenopsis. So availability, check. Affordability, compared to some other orchids, again, check. They can be pretty affordable if they're not in an arrangement, especially the miniature ones or the discounted ones. And this can be an encouraging thing for a beginner who doesn't really know how to access orchid nurseries or that they even exist. But afterwards, caring for a Phalaenopsis is super easy as well. First of all, naturally speaking, the ancestors of these orchids don't grow in environments or climates very different than, let's say, our homes. Yes, sure. I'm not gonna say that our home equals the jungle because that's not the case. But when it comes to temperatures, they can actually tolerate and even thrive in typical home conditions. Since they don't really require a lot of light, again, many homes can offer adequate amounts of lights for these orchids. So we're already starting with a pretty good foundation. But then comes mass hybridization, and not only that, selecting the hybrids that humans liked most. And I'm not only referring to the visuals, but also we've also selected those individuals which were more robust, more adaptable, more forgiving to home conditions. So after hundreds upon hundreds of years of selective breeding, we ended up with a plant which is very robust, very resilient, and very adapted to our conditions. Now sure, there are some soft spots. Since we're not actually growing this orchid naturally, we're forcing it quote-unquote to grow upright because it's convenient for us, whereas naturally it would grow something like this on a tree. There are some soft spots. Crown rot, stem rot, these things happen a lot in cultivation, especially if conditions are a little bit more humid than they should be. Also, root rot and root diseases because of inadequate medium or inadequate watering or things of the sorts, they are pretty common in cultivation. But they are a result of how we're actually cultivating these orchids. It doesn't really have to do with the orchid herself. The orchid is adapted to withstand these things. We're just forcing it to grow in a very unnatural way. But if you compare it to other orchids, definitely the Phalaenopsis is the most resilient orchid you can have because it doesn't fuss too much about the low humidity in your home, about the low light in your home, or even if you don't have way too much time to water it. It is very drought tolerant. You cannot say that for a lot of Oncidiums, and I cannot really say that Cattleyas thrive in pretty low light conditions. Overall, yes, I do believe Phalaenopsis are the most suited for beginners. They will be pretty forgiving in comparison to other orchids, but they do have their soft spots, of course, and you just have to be a little careful with those. Next up, Neto Ariaza is saying, I've heard that you should water with coconut water a few times during the year. True? Well, as far as I'm concerned, it is an absolute myth. And we discussed a little bit about something very similar with banana peel water last time. Well, this is in the same category. And I think last time I invented something that I'm hoping it will take off. Maybe I should do a viral TikTok. Rose water. That's something I invented. It's the equivalent of that. banana peel, rice water, coffee, what else? Tea, and other all sorts of household items which people one day thought, I think this will be good for my orchid, so I'm just gonna make a viral TikTok out of it. It's just that, just something for the internet as far as I'm concerned. Now, some of these practices, let's say, they were used maybe hundreds of years ago when people didn't have as much chemistry and biology knowledge as we have today. And they were trying out and quote unquote inventing all sorts of stuff and miracle products, not only for plants, but also for people as well. I'm gonna go off on a tangent here, but Lisa Eldridge actually has a really wonderful video which I will post down below, which showcases how makeup evolved throughout the years. And I think many of you know already that back in the day, women would used to put all sorts of very toxic chemicals on their faces because they thought it would help their skin, it would make them look better, when in reality, all of those substances such as lead and all sorts of things that I don't remember right now, they were very detrimental. I personally consider all of these things you see on TikTok a sort of regression, sort of going back in time and putting on our faces stuff that women, or actually people, hundreds of years ago would put on their faces. It's the same with orchids. At least this is how I see it. Putting rice and all sorts of other substances is not something necessarily efficient. It can also be detrimental for your orchid. So I consider all of these things myths. And I personally do stick to the more scientific aspect of things. I like to use proper fertilizers that show me their ingredient list so that I can research each of those ingredients and see why it is presented in that formulation, why is it good for the orchid, what are those elements doing for my orchid, and so on and so forth. That's me. Everything else, including my creation, the rose water, which heck, I wanna see go viral because I'm gonna take so much credit for it. Don't do it, don't use rose water. So all of these things, there's a term for it, excuse my sincerity, but it's called toilet research. You can imagine why it's called that way. That's how I consider it. It's absolutely fine if you don't see things like me, but if you're asking me, there you go, that's what I would say. Here's another very interesting idea. It is a question, but I'll make it as a statement. Repotting an orchid or a new environment can stunt the growth or the flower spike. And I will have to say that is a true statement. It can definitely affect new growth on an orchid or flower spikes. You might have heard me say a few times in my videos that typically I would not repot orchids which are in bloom. And this is because of two reasons. First of all, if the orchid has a few blooms and a few more buds, well, those buds might actually not end up opening because the orchid is now diverting some of its energy to getting adjusted to a new environment inside the pot. It doesn't actually know it's been repotted, but it knows the roots have been disturbed because of the little micro bruises or things of the sorts that the roots have gone through. So the orchid is trying to figure out what has happened and what is the next step it should take in its survival. Certainly, opening of those buds is not top priority at the moment. Top priority is to be stable and to figure out if it needs to grow roots or leaves or other things of the sort. So from this point of view, yes, a repot can definitely make flower spikes stop blooming. It doesn't always happen. Sometimes with the more robust orchids, such as the Phalaenopsis, hence why it is such a good orchid for beginners. When we repot those orchids and they're in good condition and we manage to do a good repot where the roots are pretty much intact, they will not even feel they have been repotted, so they will continue to bloom normally. But with other orchids, it doesn't really happen. Some orchids do really have pretty sensitive roots when it comes to removing that medium. Things can happen, the velamen can get bruised, they will go into a little bit of a shock, and I don't think the flowers will last all that much or the buds will open. When it comes to a new environment, again, yes, an orchid can take a little break, quote unquote, from growing to figure out what happened. If the environment it is currently in is very, very different from the previous environment, and this typically applies to humidity, I've noticed. If an orchid is coming from a very high humidity environment to a pretty low humidity environment, it will start transpiring more water than usual, which will lead to less water in the entire orchid. So at this point, the orchid needs to regulate the stomatas, the breathing, all of those things, all of a sudden differently. So this process takes a little bit of energy, a little bit of time. The orchid needs to settle in, quote unquote. Pretty much this is what we mean when we say let an orchid settle in. It needs to figure out the parameters and how to react to those parameters. So yes, growth can be postponed, it can be slowed down. I'm not sure if stunted. That is a pretty drastic thing to happen. Usually if we lose all of the roots or all of the leaves, that's when the orchid gets stunted and has issues growing due to a lack of energy. But introduction into a new environment typically can make an orchid just slow down and pause for a little bit until it figures out pretty much where it is. Quote unquote, of course. Now, one thing I can assure you is not a myth is today's sponsor, Skillshare. Most of you probably already know that Skillshare is an online learning community with thousands of creative and inspiring classes for people who love to learn every day. This is the place where you can explore, expand on, or learn new things like drawing, painting, design, photography, and much more. In the past months of using Skillshare myself, I managed to learn quite a great deal about painting, which has always been something I struggled with, about the process of actually creating videos, about finding my own style and actually being able to take it out of my mind and into the real world, and much, much more. There are so many courses on so many different subjects. I really just want to have more hours in a day to be able to view them all. Many of the times it happens that I get inspired by things that I thought would never interest me, but now they do. All the classes are premium, have no ads, and new content is added all the time. If you'd like to try Skillshare, visit the link below, and the first 1,000 of you will get a completely free 1-month trial to the premium membership. So check it out at the link down below. I hope you'll enjoy it, and in the end, thank you all for supporting the people who support my channel. Another good one, if the spike doesn't turn brown, it will flower again. You might be tempted to say truth, but I will say myth. All right, let me get a Phalaenopsis. Okay, another very good thing about Phalaenopsis is that they can actually rebloom from the very same flower spike. Now, their ancestors, some of the species, are actually sequential bloomers. They will continue to bloom from the very same flower spike for years and years and years, and some of those traits remained with today's hybrids. However, the key word here is hybrid, and a very complex hybrid. There have been I'm just realizing I'm kind of disturbing the bud of my Brassivola. Maybe I shouldn't. Oh, but now you can't see it. Oh no. Okay, better. Did I tell you I love Brassivolas, and especially the Cucullata? Where was I? Right, so keyword here is hybrid. We have had hundreds of years of hybridizing and selecting these orchids, time in which we continuously cross them with all sorts of species and hybrids. At this point, a flower shop Phalaenopsis can actually have heritage from 20 other orchids, both species and hybrids. And with so much gene heritage, it's kind of hard to tell what it's going to do next. Is it going to be prone to reblooming from the same flower spike? Is it going to completely abort flowers once per year, then grow vegetatively and then produce another brand new flower spike? Is it prone to keikis? Is it prone to branches? Is it prone to a very long flower spike? It's very, very hard to tell with these hybrids, even though they might look very similar between them. So in some cases, yes, you will have a flower spike, which if it remains alive and green, it can start to put on some branches immediately after the first flush or even the next season. But it is also very valid that another hybrid will not absolutely do this ever in its life. Or maybe sometimes it will and sometimes it won't. It is a bit of a lottery because their genes are a bit of a lottery as well. So it all depends on the individual, but definitely don't expect all Phalaenopsis to behave in the same way, because really they're all so incredibly different between them. Speaking about humidity, here is a myth, which you correctly assumed it's a myth. Spoilers. Orchids like high humidity, so you should regularly spray or spritz them with water. And that is a myth. Although, the first part of the sentence is pretty true. Hey, all tropical plants kind of like humidity, It doesn't mean they will not grow in lower humidity, it just means they will maybe perform a little better in higher humidity. So that is absolutely true, and it's not valid only for orchids, but for other plants as well. You know, so you have a monstera there, and some other plants in the grow room. They all like high humidity because they do come from regions with high humidity. But they can definitely adapt to lower humidity as well. About the spritzing or spraying or misting part though, oh boy, that can lead to a whole lot of trouble. I will return to what I was saying about the Phalaenopsis at the beginning. We are trying to grow these orchids in a pretty unnatural way. It benefits them indirectly because it benefits us, and if we can take care of them easier in this way, they will be happier because they're taken care of. If we're trying to imitate their natural habitat as much as to not actually be able to care for them, who can plant a tree in the middle of the living room, right? Then it's not good for them. But this comes at a cost. And as I was saying, leaving water in the crown of Phalaenopsis, even in the new growth of cattleyas or other orchids, can lead to rotting, because we just simply don't have the wind, air movement, and just freshness of air that they will naturally have in their natural habitat. Where am I going with this? Spraying and spritzing them doesn't increase humidity anywhere around the orchid. It does increase it for like a minute, maybe 30 seconds, and then it kind of goes away. What you'll have left then is water droplets on the orchid, not actual relative humidity evenly in the air. You will just have water droplets, and if those water droplets accumulate quite a lot in the crown and in the leaf joints, then you will have some rotting issues. It doesn't always happen. In some environments which are super dry or super hot, or even outside in your garden, if you're growing your orchids outside, it can be absolutely fine to just spritz them or hose them down a little bit, and that's fine. But those are kind of special cases. Most of us growing orchids in our living room don't really have the same benefits as the outside world. So for us, it's a little tricky and a little risky to start to spritz the orchids. And really, it doesn't do as much as you think it does. More efficient would be a humidifier, which will deliver mist, not droplets, very, very fine mist, and it will even out the humidity around the orchid. It will not create just droplets here and there. It will pretty much even out the whole humidity in a room, maybe even, or at least in an area of the room. And that's a much more efficient way of increasing humidity if that is what you're looking for. But spraying and spritzing and misting, I will tell you, doesn't do as much as you would think. It's just not consistent enough, and maybe with some plants it's absolutely fine and it's not so risky. With orchids it can be really risky depending how the environment is in your living room. I would definitely advise you not to do it unless you're really sure that water evaporates like, ooh, what was that? Evaporates like that. There we go. Yeah, so that's how I stand on misting. I personally never mist my orchids. I do shower them sometimes in the middle of summer when they're super dusty. I have no choice. I need to shower them, but I usually only do it once a year. I try to keep it at a minimum, even if my temperature is like super hot outside. And lastly, black orchids exist? Truth. Well, I kind of wish. Practically, it's myth, but they can really fool you that they're black. Black is not actually a color, and it's certainly not one that plants in general can develop. It is just the ability of this particular surface to reflect the yellow wavelengths of the sun, right? The sun doesn't actually produce black wavelengths. So how are we actually capable of seeing black? Well, it's because these surfaces don't actually reflect anything. They actually absorb all of the wavelengths. So as far as my knowledge goes, there isn't a flower that actually absorbs all of the wavelengths. However, there are flowers which can appear very, very dark and black even, but they're actually a very, very dark purple or a dark red. And good news, there is a very, very well-known orchid. It's a hybrid, but it's a very well-known orchid in cultivation called the Monierara Millennium Black. Wait. You do Monierara Millennium Magic Witchcraft. All right, this orchid really appears black, but if sunshine or a strong light is shine onto the flowers, you can definitely see they are a very dark purple. Nevertheless, it is the darkest orchid that we can grow in our homes, as far as I know. If there are other hybrids, or there will be in the future, I don't know. There are some other orchid species which can come close. Some Dracula orchids do have very dark colors. Also, there is the Maxillaria, I think variabilis, or the Schunkiana, which can be very, very dark. None of them are actually truly black. Naturally, that is. So yeah, sadly, I really don't believe there are any true black orchids, maybe not even any true black flowers. But when it comes to coming close to it, there are definitely a few orchids, and my suggestion is the Millennium Magic. It is a catasetum type orchid, and I assure you in person, it is a wonderful looking orchid. So great myth or truth. Sadly, it's a myth, but it's not very, very far from being an actual truth. Alrighty then, so that's about it for today. There are more comments that you guys left. Feel free to leave me a comment down below asking me if something is a myth or truth, but I do still have a lot of them from my previous videos, so I will address them in my next episodes. For now, I hope you've enjoyed today's episode, and I hope you learned something new. Thank you so much for watching, and thank you Skillshare for sponsoring another episode from our Myth or Truth series. Subscribe to my channel for more orchid videos, tutorials, experiments, updates, and other fun orchid subjects. If you wish to support the channel, do consider becoming a member or visit the merch store linked down below in the description. You can also follow me on Instagram and Facebook. It's always nice to stay in touch there as well. And with that said, I'll see you all next time. Bye!